to Evoke's first seminar, 2022. I'm not the biggest fan of big introductions, so here this is that guy, and he will explain everything by itself. I guess it's about this magazine. I'm very curious about it because I was personally interested. So now it's your stage.
Thank you. Leave that to the end because you don't know what's coming. So hi, yes, I'm representing Conspiracy. For those who don't know Conspiracy, we just won Assembly's 30-year award for Best Intro. That's probably enough of a credit to put it down. And we did a little project over holidays this year where we ended up taking a lot of old disc magazines and putting them in an online readable form. I think the techniques we used were really interesting, so I'm just going to go through a few of those and maybe provide some context and that sort of stuff. There's a brief outline for the talk. This is what I'm going to talk about. Like just a quick introduction of what diskmag is, in case you don't know, for those who are watching. Why we did this. Then there's a lot of sort of how we did this. There was a lot of technicality involved. There's different stages of the project. How old stuff like diskmags that were, very pixely and stuff, how they translate to the web. Some of the case studies, which I think are funny. A couple of the takeaways that we did in the project, and then what potentially might happen now. And what afterwards, now that we've announced it and stuff. So, for those who don't know, that's just a very quick introduction. This magazine is a disc magazine. It's analogous to what print media would be if it was entirely digital. It's just an executable file that has text, music, graphics, people write all sorts of stuff. It's very much a product of its time. I don't think there would be a reason to do a disc mag. There is no reason to do a disc mag nowadays. That there's internet, there's web portals, there's all sorts of publications that do the same job. At the time, obviously, because transferring files and stuff was so hard, grouping stuff together and making it more of a magazine that comes out every month or every 2 months instead of this sort of constant online stream of information was a lot more practical at the time. What I mentioned is not originated from the scene. It is a very scene thing, but originally it was in the 70s, like soft disk and stuff, that we invented it. It's not exclusive to the scene. Even, I don't want to say recent, but mid to late 2000s, there were, PC Gamer was doing like a diskmag-like thing where they were mixing up like game journalism with like interactive content and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting, but definitely, and of course there's always that slight blurred edge of the scene. I'm sure you know when like you have people even here in Evoke, but don't make them, but they sort of, you know them, you hang around these kind of people. They know about the scene, but they wouldn't consult themselves in it. But they are part of this computer culture, especially in the 90s when having a computer was already like an entry ticket to this sort of stuff. Or even in the 80s, it was something that just organically happened. And there was a lot of disc mags where the scene was like a 10% portion and the rest was just people talking about their days, from football to geopolitics and stuff. So but for the scene part, for us at least, it was an important thing because when we were in Conspiracy, most of us started really seriously thinking about, this theme thing in the late 90s. It was a way for us to learn about how the scene worked, what the lingo was, who the people were, how a party worked, reading reports and stuff, without actually going there. So we wouldn't go in blind. We had a vague idea of what the structure was, right? And I think that there's a lot of information there. It's a print media thing, so it was emulating print media, magazines and stuff, this sort of short, or I don't know, I wouldn't know what the term would be, that sort of periodic media, like magazines that only come out every so often, in that it would collect a lot of information, long-form content, articles, talks and stuff, reviews of music CDs, or reviews of demos, reviews of films, that sort of stuff, but also, as I said, just people talking about whatever was on their mind. But it was also like a lively way of getting ads out, someone trying to sell like, you know, computer hardware, bicycles, or just, hey, I read your article and I disagree, or I agree, or you gave me another idea. I'm making it a lot more nicer than it was at the time. We'll get there at some point. So in the same way you had classified ads in magazines or just ads or you know, the mailbag kind of stuff. It was a thing the same way it was in diskmags. Now, on the PC, I would put the end of the 2000s as like the declining era of it. There hasn't been any new ones released for a long time. C64 is still, I mean, there's like 5-6 magazines released every year. On Amiga, it's like 1 per year, but I mean, it's still 1 per year, right? Like that's got to count for something. So it's definitely a format that didn't age well. I think that mostly because it was an executable format, you had to download it and click on it and stuff. You had a computer. It wasn't something that ported to your phone, and now we have all these like multi-platform device problems. It was at the time in the 90s when it was really peaking, it was the easiest solution for that particular problem, right? And then it sort of aged out, right? But that also means that there's a tremendous amount of content that we produced. Like some of these magazines had like 60, 70, 80 issues, right? Like imagine each of them were like a couple of megabytes of just raw text. And then there's always a lot of crap in there, but there's gotta be gold, right? And I think it would be a waste, and I thought it would be a waste for it to actually get completely lost in the sort of void where we have the files, it's just no one reads them anymore because there's no awareness and people don't know how to run it anymore. So that was kind of what I would call the moment of perspiration, and that's a word I just invented a week ago. I'm sure that's a familiar thing to a lot of you, where like you have an idea and you get excited for it for like 5 minutes, and then you realize that I have to do this. And you don't like you really want to do it, but also you haven't slept properly for like a week now, and like so that was my sort of moment where, so towards the tail end of the diskmag era, we were really the conspiracy guys were really getting into it, and each of us were trying to make our own. I'm not afraid to admit that I've tried. The other guys will have to come up with their own admissions, but they basically either did or tried. So it was something that for us was a very sort of the good kind of nostalgia tickle, right? And so we had this strong background, and I just remember one day at work, I was thinking about something. I don't even remember which article, but I was like, I haven't read those old paint articles for a while. I wish I didn't need to download these magazines and just run it on my work computer and stuff. Like surely, why does there've been efforts of like making online versions of old magazines, but like for some reason, me as a sort of tech brain person, I kept thinking like, that date and I'm sitting in front of a browser that's like way overpowered. And I kept thinking, like, what if we could take these old diskmags and the original data without the change and somehow display them, render them, not emulate them, render them in the browser without changing a single byte of the data that was in there originally. That got me thinking, because like, there's certainly a good reason, a good argument to make for it. First off, reverse engineering, I don't know if that's just me. I love taking stuff apart. Software, hardware I'm not very good at, but software, taking it apart, like every time I see a demo that's like an executable and like a data file, I'm like, oh yeah, we're doing this. And it's super fun. I've been doing this since I was like 14. Like, you know, I've done a bit of like software reverse engineering, cracking stuff. But like, if there's a data file, and I like, especially because like I used to like demo music so much that like I need the MP3 out of this demo, or I need the XM file out of this demo, and I need to learn how to take this apart. So I sort of over the years I've become very familiar with like text editing and stuff, and it's puzzle solving. It's fun, right? Like everyone loves puzzles. There's also the argument that like, we invented this technology, HTML, CSS, that's literally for rendering all sorts of weird text in the browser, images, audio. Well, okay, we didn't invent HTML for audio, but you know, it is what it is, right? So why that hasn't translated, I don't know, but it feels logical to me to be able to translate, right? So that to me was an argument of like, this makes sense, this sort of path makes sense in my head. And of course, there's an argument like, yeah, but you can just emulate stuff, right? You can just throw stuff into the DOS box and then it will work. And the problem is, like most 90s software, like they barely worked. Like when you throw them into the emulator, that assumes that it was correctly written, right? Then you get this sort of weird things where like, in the 90s, if you remember, a lot of the games and demos and stuff sometimes started with like this list of like, pick which video card do you have, and there would be a list of like 15 entries, like this one. And like good luck emulating that, because these are basically just workarounds before like weather standards happened. And then like, it becomes, and in emulation terms, it becomes a mix and match of like, which one of these does DOSBox support correctly? None of them. That's the actual result. So like that's so. Yeah, and this is not a diss at emulation software developers. They're incredible people, but like there's no emulator good enough to emulate that level of broken code that sometimes these diskmags had. Like there were some diskmags that had like these horror stories where the protected mode handler was so broken that it would throw an exception, which then throws the instruction pointer into the data, and then you just get like random like overwrites in your fat table, and then your computer wouldn't boot anymore. So there's also additional reasons.
What is this ringing coming?
I think it's actually my telephone. Yeah, usually this is like an office, so.
And what? And why?
But this is
Hello?
yeah, it was up.
Talk about old school, right? Like. Anyway, sorry about it, viewers. There's also the sort of historic argument where there's, as I said, this amount of crazy amount of data that we can use, we can look at, but it's annoying to find and annoying to look at again, because then you have to sort of it's just annoying to get to that data to try to emulate and stuff instead of just clicking on the browser, right? We're used to that now. It's 2022. So there's also my argument here is that there's what I call the preservation of integrity, where I can make an argument that what you're seeing in the browser, what I ported to the browser, is by exact the same data that you can download from the archive. So I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. There were no changes to the data. So if there's an extremely haughty opinion, sorry, this is historically what happened at the time. There's no way for me, because I'm using the original data without no alteration, I can make an argument that it becomes a historic document, rather than just something that I put together.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Did you have any requests of people wanting it not to be searchable, for like because they want their
No, but it wouldn't be searchable anyway because it's like very heavy JavaScript anyway. But like the domain, it blocks search robots, just to be sure, you know, because it's But I don't think the current tech of like crawler bots has that issue of being able to parse JavaScript at that point. But yes, that was it was a
You
concept.
want some sort of search to be able to, like, if you're looking for articles, I don't know, about the Party 97, you want to be able to search the...
That would require us to build an index.
Okay.
So that's a different situation. It's not something on the plans right now. It's possible. Yeah, it would certainly be possible to do it. Which is interesting. My next point is that there's a lot of like, if you know Gits, which he's probably going to have, he dove headfirst into this kind of stuff because there's a lot of research and documentation that you can do because people are doing research and documentation and putting them into the magazines. Like there's a lot of coding articles, but also just creating a historical snapshot of things. It's incredibly useful because we get insight into what computer culture was. We got insight how Demoparty was like. There's a lot of, like, we sometimes in the scene use this whole, like, oh, back in the day argument to just almost like a blanket statement. Like, back in the day, it was everything that I'm saying right now, right? Like, and you don't know what it was, don't know what it was true. And we'll get to that at some point, that you can actually cross-reference. I had a bunch of personal reasons. One of them is one of the big magazines at the time in Hungary. We found out that the coder of it passed away in 2020, and I don't know if it was. I never met him. I never knew him. But to me, it felt like if this was one of his like life's big work, then I felt like I had a personal motivation to like showcase it to the world, right? And of course, as I said, like us in Conspiracy, we were big diskmag nerds, so it was something that was fun to do. So with that in mind, let's have a plan of attack. So we have browsers, and they're way bigger than they should be, which means they have a bunch of stuff that they can do that they didn't used to do in the 90s. For example, you can load files into binary, right? And that didn't used to be the case, but it certainly makes custom loaders and stuff possible. You can treat them as byte arrays, which is even closer to just, you know, car asterisk, whatever you want. It's good enough for us, right? We have web fonts now. So we can have pixel accurate representation of what the fonts used to be, if we're going down that rabbit hole anyway. You can create images. You can create images and pixel, you know, just from RGB pixel data. So we can, even if they're using custom image formats, we can take care of that as well. We can render and play audio. So that pretty much covers everything, right? Like that's, browsers can do a diskmag. And my mission statement was, if you can unpack RAR in a browser, you can pretty much do anything at that point. So, and we get back to that, why that particular sentiment was important for me. But also, let's think about just before we start hex dumping stuff. Let's think about the structure that we expect to meet. How diskmag was made. First, you had all these idiots who were writing the articles, then they got sent to the editor, and then the editor made the diskmag, right? That's basically it. There were a lot of content changes. Pretty much every month there was new diskmag coming out. But we're talking about like one specific diskmag releasing issues every month. Which had new articles, new music, and the actual engine themselves didn't really change. You didn't get, if you have a magazine that was releasing something every month, they might have put fixes in, but they didn't really sort of change the look of the magazine radically at the time. And there was an extremely high throughput where it meant like, literally, you got all the articles and putting the mags together had to be done really quickly because it was, sometimes some mags would like, once a month or even twice a month. There were articles I found like people were suggesting like, oh, we get so much content, we should do it like twice a month, every 2 weeks. Imagine that, right? But it's also the editor wasn't the coder. Usually the editor was just a guy and they got replaced with the old code and stuff like that. And that to me implies that there has to be some sort of data-driven situation where The editor gets a bunch of scripts and tools and whatever. They don't know, assume they don't know how to code, but they still have to know how to put a map together, right? So that to me says, if we solve the solution of one magazine, then we can solve the solution for that whole row of magazines, right? Because it's the same data running, it's the varying data but running with the same code, right? Turns out not always true, but we'll get there. So here's basically how it works for most software. I would argue if it's a game, you load your data and you display it. If it's a demo, you load your data and you display it. What's that joke on Twitter nowadays? You load it into RAM and play the demo. That's how most software works. In case that person making this bold statement didn't know. The only difference is we're not the one authoring the data this time. We're just working with someone else's data. We just have to figure out how that data is set up, right? And knowing that, let's make some more assumptions. How is a diskmag structured, right? You have like this main table of contents, main menu, index, whatever, call it what you want. And then you pick one, and it just shows the article, right? That's most of the cases. I mean, obviously, in newer magazines in the tail end of the 2000s, you had like more of a website like hyperlinks and stuff like that, and subcategories and submenus and stuff. But generally, what this implies to me is that there's some sort of file system in there. Now, this is very generous because most of, like a lot of the time, these are just like numeric indices, like that table of contents has just like article 5, article 7, article 10, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't really matter as long as we have databases of like, here's files, they have some sort of primary key, which can be just like the number, like an auto-increment index. I'm very SQL around it right now, but you get what I mean. Like there's some sort of key value pair there, even if it's just implied, right? If we can crack that sort of thing, that just means we can probably have a very good navigation in our data. Now, let's think about the most common scenarios, and I'm talking about mostly DOS diskmags here. We were DOS people at the time, and I don't know enough about Amiga and CC to say that, so it was going to be mostly DOS based. First off, this is the beautiful scenario where you have one executable that barely ever changes, and then you have a data file. That's like the Doom WAD kind of thing, where if you just take the WAD file and just put it next to Doom, then you get a whole different set of maps, and then you can change the textures and all that stuff. That's the clean solution. There's a slight variation of that, which in the DOS days were called the overlay, which is effectively the same, but you just sort of plug the data after the executable. Some Windows do this, demos do this nowadays as well. It's the same simplicity because you just have to either figure out the executable size from the header, or like at the tail end of the overlay file, there's like a byte that says like, go back this much, and then that's where it starts. That's still pretty clean, like that's fine. Then it gets rougher when some of the data that you're trying to find, like offsets and even sometimes the whole table of contents, anything that you would need for your diskmag is somewhere inside the executable. And of course, being something that's built with a compiler, it means that like you have 4 issues that's going to be in 4 different places. Not great, but you know that's what we have to live with. And of course, it's been very possible that like the rest of the data in the data file. I've seen magazines where like the articles were in the data file, but the table of contents was in the executable because who cares, right? Like they just wanted to get the mag out. And of course, there's the worst case scenario where it's a complete mess of things, and half the stuff is in the executable. And you'd think it couldn't be worse, but at the same time, as I asked her, is that like the executable can actually be compressed, which makes it, you know, a gigantic pain to deal with this kind of stuff, but not unsolvable, unfortunately, for my spare time. So first approach, let's just find a file system, table of contents sort of thing. Usually when there's a data file, you look into it and you will see different file names. We all know if we've done DOS demos, Windows demos, you know how to make a pack file, right? You just it's almost like creating a zip file that's not compressed, or like a tar file, something. You have a table of contents, you have file names, you have an offset in the length and so on, so like the compressed length depending on what's in your data file. They're relatively easy to find. You just take the file names there and you just sort of map them around and try to find like, okay, well this starts here, that means like that's the record length. But these record lengths vary, so there must be some sort of something that varies in length. Oh, the file name varies in length because there's like the gap is different. So you just work it around. Now, you're probably wondering what this editor is that it so nicely paints this sort of visual. It's called the 010 editor, and it's specifically made for reverse engineering, and I wouldn't leave home without it at this point. And it's like $50 for home use. So it has this thing called binary templates, and the whole point is that you just create the structure, which is like your file structure, and then just add some color to it, and it basically say like, I'm assuming from here there's like 10 records of these, and it just sort of colors them in for you. And it's extremely good for just visualizing data that you don't know. It's really hardcore reverse engineering tool. If there's no index, you can always just find the article content and work backwards from there. That's a bit more annoying. You have like one big block of text with no idea of where stuff starts or ends, and then you just have to go back and find those offsets. It's really annoying, but it is doable, and you're just gathering data at this point. And it's as long as you can run the original magazine in like an emulator, assuming you can run it in an emulator, then you can just see like how an article is supposed to look like, what's the first couple of words, and then you go like, okay, well, this must start here, just looking at the words, right? Or this is that article, this is that article. You start to build like an implied structure. The thing is, there's always some encryption, and so I was talking to Charlie about this yesterday, because it's one of his magazines, and I didn't ask him, but he told me like the only reason there's that encryption there is, and this is a quote, perceived pool value, which is a fucking great term, but you know, now it's causing a problem for us. At the same, then again, like, raise your hand if you can't practice. Now, genuinely raise your hand. Not Howard, not you.
Come on. I mean.
If you can't take a photo, homework. Then there's also a bit rougher script. Just like adding stuff, that's fine. But you know, there's always XORs and spinning XORs and that kind of stuff. So then you start looking for like patterns like, oh well, if it's text, sure you must have line breaks, right? So you're looking for that pattern, and then if you're looking at like, there's the classic DOF line break is the 0B0A, and it immediately starts with 5B5A. Then the space is 20, which is another common thing in text. There's, you know, sort of 70s. So maybe there's a bit flip there, or XOR, or something like that. And there's tools for that as well. There's one called mrip, and what it does is that it's a little hex viewer that you can spin the XOR value on. And you just do it until you see the text. I love this thing. That's something wrong with me, but I love this stuff. And then there's also that thing where it's compressed, right? But like, that's pretty obvious, right? The nice thing is, coders were already lazy back then. So a lot of this stuff that you were seeing used was, I don't know if they were open source or were just reverse engineered, but a lot of these like known compressors at the time, like Diet and LZXE and stuff like that, the source was somewhere available on BBSs and later on FTPs and stuff like that. So you could find that stuff. So you just look for telltale signs in the executable when it's you see the copyright string of like, you know, PK where, and I'm like, okay, there we go. More on this later because it's funny. And of course, so if all else fails, there's always the good old disassembly. One thing I'd like to point out, I'm sure a lot of people, some of you might know IDA, which is the interactive disassembler. This is basically the benchmark for disassemblers. It's also like 5,000 euros, but there's a free version that can decompile DOS because of the wonderful people at ScumVM who chewed the ears of Hex-rays until they release the free version and can still decompile DOS. So nothing's stopping you, there's the URL, you can download it for free. Thank you, ScumVM. So, now assuming that we've taken this mag apart and we have the data and we found everything, let's just see how we can convert this graph. Now the thing is, like hypertext at the time and like HTML markup and markdown and all of these things were you could either call it unnecessarily over-engineered for what you were trying to do. Most of the time it was literally just what you call control codes. Some non-printable character that has some characteristic where you go, okay, if you see this, then from that point on the text is red, right? Or if you see this from that point on, the text is not red. And all of them had different variations, and sometimes there were always entire articles about how to use this crap. How this works is effectively a state machine. You just go and every line, and you meet the control code, you flip some sort of property bit, and you just go further. The problem is, like, all of these implementations vary, they're never consistent. Of like, oh, does the state get reset when you get a new line? Does the state get reset on a new page? Does the state get reset ever? Trial and error. You just mess with your articles until the first one looks okay, and then you look at the rest, and you will eventually find ones that don't look okay, and you just iterate. It's annoying. And the only way to really re-implement it is you actually like re-implement the state machine, because you're trying to create HTML, right? You're trying to make color changes as you go. So you just basically do like a little state machine where you can have like two functions that just like put a span on, take a span off, open a tag, close a tag. It's incredibly annoying. You could do it probably like per character if you really want to, because like who really cares how complex your HTML is at that point. I spent a bit of time making it look nice, but you're really just working around a weird format at this point. So it's probably one of the very similar to like how an emulator looks internally, where like the emulation is correct, except this one really popular game is crashing because it's a buggy piece of crap. So we have to put like this 10-page hack into it, or like I'm sure like NVIDIA drivers where like clearing the screen is like 1,000 lines of code. So there's another formatting technique, which I think I even hate more.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're happy.
No, it's not real HTML, it's pseudo HTML.
Hence the quotes around it. It's awful. There's no logic in like closing and opening and
I didn't invent it. It's not my fault this time. I just used it.
Did everyone know that he said it this time? I think this is where the mag got its name, because it is a pain. In the end, I just like, these are control codes. They're just not binary, right? They're just printable, and then just used in the state machine. Pain had like a very particular one that I thought was annoying, was there was a feature for tabbing where there was like a code that would like move to a certain tab. This is like you would in like a Word document. But of course, re-implementing that in HTML, like good luck, right? That's where you have to break a few eggs. Like good enough is good enough. Like if 80% of 35 magazines renders fine, then that's good enough for me. And of course, like I was lucky enough that Unlock actually found his own like text files about like how to use this crap. So a lot of like, obviously like some of it is HTMLS, but like you see there's like this UL one, which is in HTML is like the unordered list, which is like a bulleted list. Here it's actually short for underline. And then there's stuff like the AJ. I have no idea why it's AJ, but it's like justified text. Like, yeah.
Justified, I guess.
Absolutely justified, yeah. Yeah, it's just, all of them, it's just every single, it's like a puzzle game where every level is different, which is incidentally my favorite kind of game. So images. Some of this stuff is already known by the browsers. I'm shocked to learn that BMP support is still somewhere in Chrome and Firefox. The funniest part is that, of course, like in Paint, there's this whole thing where it's like transparent BMP, where one color is keyed out to be the transparent one. So you're actually ending up writing your own like weird BMP sort of canvas trickery and stuff. It's not fun. Then the most common ones were like PCX Albion, which was like, PCX was a DOS form, and I think Albion was more of an Amiga thing, like was it Deluxe Paint? I think was Deluxe Paint, yeah. I mean, obviously browsers don't really support it anymore, but I mean, just write it. Like, it's not a complicated format, it's just really annoying because it's a planar format. Sometimes, depending on the flags in the header. So yeah, it's but yeah, if you were on Discord at the time, that's why I was asking about all like EGA video modes and stuff like that. Because there's a bunch of custom formats where it's just literally just a big plane dumped out, and you're just trying to figure out how it works. And this is where we go back to like the 010 is genius, where it has a visualize tab, which actually shows all the bytes like as a heat map, and you can pick like the width of like where the stride is of a line. And suddenly, like, if you keep fiddling with it, eventually, like, oh, that looks like an Infobia logo. But it repeats 6 times, so that's maybe 6 bit planes. Fun stuff. I love it. No, I genuinely do. There is something wrong with me, but there's another fun thing that actually you can do is that, like, browsers are obviously like fully asynchronous, so you can have like asynchronous image loading in your diskmag. Essentially how you put images in is that you have your state machine, because most of these images, when you implement them in the middle, they just control codes. Like here's a 0x7 and the file name or a number or something, and you just basically put like a shim there, like a little container tag. And then once you're done with rendering the HTML, you just fire up a bunch of requests until it just bail the actual files. A bit annoying, but you know, that's what you have to do. Now, fonts. Windows Macs are luckily just stock fonts, you know, Arial, Veda, whatever is around. Those fonts, those Macs are usually the classic, you know, 8x8 or 8x16 fonts. You just learn to look at the hacks and recognize the DOS fonts, because a lot of the times they didn't repaint the entire font. Like the block characters are usually the same. So you find the block characters, you can usually see like, oh, there's the font. And you just look around. And they usually, like, for an 8x16 font, you notice that, like, because the font, the glyph of the character is usually like in the middle of the block, there's always like zeros at the end, so it becomes this very sort of centralized thing. And then of course, you dump it out, you create a bitmap out of it, and you turn the bitmap into an actual like OTF font. There's a documented process there. It's incredibly annoying, time-consuming, and manual, but you know, that's where perfectionism comes in, unfortunately. Oh, and then you have to like do the Unicode mapping between like, oh, so this font has like accented characters, and you want to be able to like the person to like copy paste out of the text, right, with the correct characters coming out. So you have to manually just like call up executable and just like click. It's really boring, probably the worst part of the whole thing, but you know, that's the full experience. That's what you have to do. So, a couple of case studies. I love these. So, Paint, password protected RAR, kind of. When you don't turn out your logging, don't turn off your logging, then your password is going to be in your temp directory. That's how you get your password. I never thought that, like, this never thought to be funny. This, by the way, like, this is going to be more of a slightly nitty-gritty part of the presentation. I didn't make screenshots for most of these, but it's like, you can't just stare at text dumps all day, right? And there were a couple of Macs that I did, like, I had a source for and stuff like that. So yeah, Paint was annoying in the sense that, like, they keep changing the password was encoded in the executable, but then, like, you only have to crack one to find where it is in the executable, how it's encoded, so then it's just like, you write a script that just dump out all the passwords for you. As we've seen there, language is pretty horrible to do, and they have like a sort of unusual structure compared to magazines where like you had like these subsections, and the subsection menu was always visible while you were reading the article. That's, I mean, it's just HTML, right? But like it was a bit of an outlier compared to the rest. But yeah, cracking Pain was one of the first things that was my first motivation. Like, I want to read Pain again. What I didn't realize is there's old Pain, which doesn't use a RAR. It's the same renderer, same markup language and all that. This was like the first 2 Windows ones I don't remember, like 99 and 2000 kind of era. Same render, but it doesn't use a RAR. It uses a custom file system with compressed files. So what do? Well, of course, sit down, look at the text dumps, trying to figure out, and you could see, like, after a while, you recognize compression types, right? Like, if you see chunks of text, you can tell it's an LZW kind of thing or some sort of stuff. You can't figure it out after a while. But it becomes arduous, then you just do disassembling and whatever, and then you just more disassembling, and then you just do it for hours, and 90% on the way, you just look more into the executable, and there's a copyright stream for the packer. So you just download the unpacker. Get that off. This was a Hungarian magazine. This was the one I mentioned where the coder passed away. This was by the way, that means hempseed, go figure. It's essentially an executable with an overlay to it. Very basic Zora exception. A lot of the stuff, like article count and stuff, was hardwired. I already tried this cracking once around in 2001 when I was like a university student. Obviously, I was nowhere near. I was like sitting with a 486 laptop and like DOS Navigator trying to like text dump the whole thing. But you know, like if you remember my demo from last year, just sometimes you just return to stuff in 20 years. I'm like, oh, okay, that was easy. Fun stuff is all the magazines, or like some of them, had like a text-based viewer written in like Turbo Pascal next to it. And I was like, okay, maybe that's the key. Maybe like this viewer parses the file in a more like logical way, right? Because the text is still there. Turns out they were all hardwired in those ones as well. But they were like the final 2 issues where they actually get it. Like it's always so ironic when like finally a demo group finishes their fantastic demo tool, they make one demo with it and then quit. That's how it felt like. They finally fixed everything and then they never released an issue again. Another fun thing about this is that the articles are actually stored as pages. So I was surprised by this. So they point to the offsets of the page, and then the menu tells the code, the menu data is structured in a way that's like, here's the title of the article, here's the first page, and here's the page count. And you basically just sort of switch between those. A couple of more ones. Pullover, this was a very short-lived one, but like, these guys are friends of mine, so I felt compelled to push their own juvenile activities back to their face, which they were bemused by. The table of contents is actually in the executable, and it's compressed. So, damn it. Yes, turns out you can unpack diet in JS, and then you unpack the executable, and then just hardwire your offsets and stuff. It's horrible, but it works. All the images I had to unhardwire. I'm not unhardwire, but like, this is a point where every single issue starts to have like this gigantic set of metadata. Because like, okay, you unpack this executable and then it starts here and it has this many entries and that sort of stuff. And of course, again, because it's a compiler, sometimes all the strings are shuffled around because that's how it felt like it was convenient and stuff, that kind of stuff. You just have to deal with it. Fleur, I'm sure you remember, you worked for it. Encrypted talk, fun times. Data's compressed, even more fun times. The talk I cracked, that was an easy one. The data compression, oh, not again. But then Nap sent me an email and said, like, by the way, this is the pack that we used for the first one, and this is the pack. And he didn't have the pack for the second, but you remember what it was. And of course, again, like, you just find those articles. Paradox, very short-lived. They use an encrypted zip that gets decrypted into a temp directory, which the magazine tells you about. So it wasn't exactly hard to get the decrypted version and then just figure out what encryption they used, because they also had a text file in the zip that was like, "Hello hacker, you must be so cool to crack our random Zorex encryption." I'm like, "Thank you for the hint." Hoogie also encrypted RAR, and this was a tough one because the random seed is the file size. I thought it was genius, which means that it varies every single time. Infobia, not packed, has a weird 2-column layout where the columns are stored in a single line. So you have 1 column, 2 columns, but the data is like this. And they have double height fonts, which are extremely annoying to implement in HTML as well. Senile was even weirder because there they didn't have control codes. They had basically like almost like an ANSI thing where they have each character, or like not ANSI, but like how you would store it in like the text mode in DOS, where it's like one is the character, the other is the color. The other is the character, the other is the color. Not plotted at all, really. Right? And then my favorite, Terra News. This was the biggest Hungarian diskmag at the time. I think they went up to 80 issues released, but that was, I think, it was a combination of like stuff released on 664 and like really old ones. This was the holy grail. This was Moby Dick, right? Like it's to the degree that there's an upcoming Moleman documentary. I'm sure you remember the Moleman 2. I hope you don't, but you probably do. The number 5 will have an interview with the creators of this as well, because it was that big of a deal. Ton of hardwired stuff. But these are the earlier issues as well. Everything's compressed, and then you spend the day disassembling the compressor. And the problem is, like RLE and like LZ compressors are easy, as I said, easy to see because you can see the fragments of text. When it comes to like Huffman base and like or like an LZ that uses bits instead of bytes, it just becomes like this incomprehensible stream of bytes, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you just disassemble and disassemble, and then, oh wait, damn it! So yeah, that was an open source one as well. And also, when I finished reporting, I also, the nice thing is, when you do this, you understand the entire sort of contents of the magazine. And then you sometimes discover stuff that was clearly not meant to be discovered. And those things are best left to the voids of time. I'm not going to go any further, but they had apparently hidden part for each issue that was called Brutal Hardcore. Go figure, it was the 90s. They also updated the engine around that time, which crashes differently. They had an actual file system this time. Compressed again, but this time not so lucky. No conference string at the time. Spent weeks on it, literally like the entire duration between Christmas and New Year's I spent on this. There was nothing to go on. I even asked Tomcat, like, dude, here's a big ass dump of like assembly. Does this look like anything to you? Can you tell? And he was like, dude. I mean, again, it was between Christmas and New Year's. It was probably the last thing you wanted to think about. But I was on a mission. I needed help. And I was like, I need to figure this out. And as I'm disassembling, because like, again, like the Huffman-based vector, disassembly is just horrible. Because it just jumps and big fiddling, and so it's not great. But I saw this little lookup table that it kept using. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to Google this. And I have no idea what I'm going to find, but I'm going to Google, oh crap, it's deflate. It's the literal 7-bit compression that is one line in PHP. And I tried it and it worked immediately. People are lazy. That's your basic assumption. People are lazy. Coders were just as lazy as they are now. That's where you spare your time. There's also merit to data-driven solutions. When you have one magazine that has one feature set, why just not change it? It will ran 30 issues with no problem. Even to this day, like, Cleve was one of those mags, where we released the last issue in like 2011. I hopped around a bit because I did Windows port and stuff like that. And it was using the same engine that they did in like 94, the same data format, because why not? And there was a lot of font wiring. And I assume we were implying a data-driven solution for the most part, because we assume the coder is not the editor. But it also, the more I thought about it, the editor doesn't care what batch file they're running, right? And the coder tells him, have this installed and run this batch file and compile the mag for you. And if it has a compiler in it, if it has an assembler in it, if it compiles an object file with a bunch of hardware values in it, they don't care, right? So that's how stuff ends up being the executable in the middle of it. So maybe that assumption was wrong, but for the most part, like with the biggest return of investment, I think it worked fine. But let's look at the fun part, the cultural takeaways. Oh boy, this part used to be 3 complete slides and I cut it down because it was horrible. Because, let's start, are Americans too dumb to code? I am not a racist, but that's always a good start, isn't it? But also, the scene is dying. In about 3 months, there will be no student thesis for us. 93! And it's a mathematical proof. Sorry. The demos are 8 megabytes and they use MP3s for music. See, I told you this archeology is fun, right? Like, what did these ancient Greeks think about us? So this is touchy subject. Every single magazine I found has 5 of these articles, where it's just this bewildered sort of research about this ancient, like, interesting alien life form called girls. And it sort of varies from this, oh, I wish there were more, or oh, we don't need them, or here's how to cheat your wife. If anyone tells you that, like, oh, in the 90s it was fine to be a girl in a scene, historic document. This was way longer, I cut it down, read it for yourself. There's another interesting takeaway is that at the time, because it was like a magazine that would ship on disk and stuff, everyone just had their address there. There's literally like 20 pages of addresses that probably like not valid anymore. But it's like, we're like, oh god, we're putting this online. So yeah, I disabled search. But like at the same time, like it's a historic document. These files exist whether we display them or not. So I did talk to Matt about this, and he said like, yeah, well, they submitted their own data. It exists on our FTP server anyway. You're not doing anything other than providing a display for it.
I guess if they request you to hide them, you have to honor it as the law of the right to be forgotten. But most people don't do it.
I don't know how that would work. I'm not a lawyer, you know, and I probably have a better idea. He said it was probably fine, in the sense that, like, yeah. So, a bit about the future. The original domain is at diskmag.conspiracy.hu, but as it turns out, someone who was a pain editor at the time had diskmag.net, which was just pointing at the demos listing of pain, but now points at ours. We also open source the whole thing in case you want to contribute to like other magazines and stuff. And one of the big things that people were requesting was the music, and that's coming as soon as Google stops deprecating a bunch of stuff that most of the audio runs on. I deliberately didn't say that browsers provide longevity. These are worse than generational changes in computing because they happen every 2 months. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, I'm happy to fill them, but that's what I was thinking as your little entertainment at the time.
We're a little bit short on time, so maybe we can just try to make a quick.
Yeah, just 1, 2, yeah.
A quick question. If you would rate yourself from how well did you preserve everything from 0 to 100%? How much of a success rate would you assign to yourself?
I would say every article is readable.
That's 100% then?
Well, the formatting is broken sometimes and stuff, but every article is readable. That's what I would say. Well, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I would say like every article readable is what was my goal.
And how much time did you spend like in work hours for that?
Don't ask me. If I admit to it, I'm gonna have a heart attack. way too much. Like you know me enough to know that it was probably not healthy.
Yeah, it's not good.
Given this is a little bit of a segue into the next seminar, which is about culture. So you
After that,
yeah. The important question. So we are to some degree biased by thinking it was all better or worse back then. What did you learn about that in terms of? Is there anything that surprised you, or did you have the impression that there is particular something about that change?
There was one observation that I made, is that the scene has been fatalistic about its own fate for 25 years now, or 30 or 40. More. And everyone was like, the scene is going to die Friday, right? Like that's one of those things. But what I started to think about is, like, first off, that probably should put our own fatalism in perspective. Like, just because Evoke has 3 demos and not 4, probably is okay, right? But at the same time, it also means that if we're too complacent about it, we get a blind spot of not noticing the problems. And the same thing with like treatment of each other, you know, minorities and kind of stuff, is that like, oh sure, it was bad back then. That doesn't mean we can't fix it now, right? Like, that's why historical documents are important to measure progress. And I think that's the main takeaway, is that take a snapshot the same way you would take a snapshot of civil rights or technology or that kind of, any kind of stuff, is that did you make enough progress to be able to say that things are better now than they were before?
Are you looking for help in the project? What specific areas do you?
Honestly, I mean, we didn't have like big goals set out. It's like, oh, we have 25 mags to do. It's like, there's a couple more that I'm working on. There's maybe if you find some fun ones that are just, there's a lot of people are asking about like C64, the MIDI ones. I don't have that background. But if someone wants to start the same, like, equivalent of like, here you can read vandalism news online, I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate that, right? Have fun with it. Like, you can use some of my system if you want, because I'm sure 64 mags are another complete pain. But then again, you're probably more knowledgeable about those than I am. So, you know, find your own projects. I think the whole idea here was like, first I'm doing this for me, because I just want to read these magazines again, and for my friends who contributed to that and they want to read it again. But also, like, you can start projects. You can do fun stuff just because out of kids. I think I want to inspire more than to create in that sense.
You just showed us how much time and resources you put into this project, and I wonder if you ever thought about getting a budget for this. Do you think it's a good idea, maybe to
mixing money and demos?
No,
That's always a good one.
Okay.
No, it's suddenly there's a target, and then suddenly there's demand, and then suddenly you're not delivering, or suddenly you don't feel like it, or suddenly it's not what they wanted, or suddenly you're trying to justify why you're working on something to display in a browser a 20-page essay about horse cocks. Like, I don't know if that would be a good, like, I'm sure there would be some weird ricochet way to get a university grant for this kind of stuff, but I don't want to imagine like the sort of mental and moral gymnastics that we need to do to get this. I just did this because I wanted to read this kind of stuff.
If you had some help, people sorting out all this stuff for you, getting money for kind of work like this, would that be helpful? So
well, I think I listed a pretty good enough reasons why not to, right? Because it would suck the fun out of it. Because suddenly it's a day job, right? Or not a day job, because I have a day job which I enjoy immensely. But then you're like, okay, do I want to do this for money on the weekend, where like people's expectations are not necessarily what I'm trying to get out of it? I'm sure like there would be a university grant, and then it was like, yeah, but you don't have to convert the fonts. It's fine if the text, but the fonts are the point. And then we have an argument, and they have the money. So yeah, ask anyone who tried to make demos for money, it's never fun and it never works out.
Yeah, maybe we should make a break here right now because I think the other seminars are about to start right now. Yeah, thank you again. Yeah, and you can talk to him directly also after.
Oh no!